Film Club, a movie podcast that examines the wide world of cinema through a perpetually lefty, pinko, commie, soy boy, cuck, Antifa, super soldier filter. But more specifically, we love movies and want to create a podcast that would appeal to the disparate tastes of our liberal, leftist, socialist, communist, Marxist, and Leninist friends. Red Rose Film Club is for leftists of all stripes who don't know what to talk about at parties other than movies and politics. My name is Craig. I work in public education and am passionate about social justice and workers' rights. My tastes range, but mostly exist on opposite ends of the highbrow, lowbrow spectrum. And I'm with...
Hey, I'm Hal. I use she, they pronouns. I work in higher ed and run a food pantry. I care about food access, reproductive justice, building a robust social welfare state, and ending the state's domination through the criminal legal system. I'm a staunch defender of Drop Dead Gorgeous, though not everything in it. And I like movies that understand life stakes are grand, no matter how big or small the stage. So let's get right into it.
Yeah, I also love Drop Dead Gorgeous. Real quick, haven't seen it in probably like 20 years.
There's a lot of indefensible stuff, especially surrounding the character of Hank. I mean, there's some pretty explicit ableism. I forget the dude's last name, but the guy from Mad TV.
Will Sasso.
Yes. Yeah.
It's Three Stooges fame.
Yes. It is a very ableist depiction of a young man, who has intellectual disabilities.
This is ringing a bell.
Yeah.
Yeah. But also Kirstie Alley's in that, right?
Right.
All right.
But basically the whole rest of the movie is just chock full of delicious, sardonic, feminine nastiness.
That's what I remember mostly from
Brittany
it, yes.
Murphy in it is
Is
really
she the lead?
deranged.
Who's the
No,
lead?
Kirsten Dunst is.
Kirsten Dunst, that's right. Yeah.
Also, I believe it's Amy Adams' first film appearance.
Oh.
But no, Brittany Murphy is the kind of like lovely but a little deranged, theater obsessed gal who's doing it for her brother, and it's very clear that her brother is like a gay man who left for New York City to pursue the life. And she's kind of making these allusions to it the whole time.
Okay.
But I fucking love that movie, and it is one of my like kind of family movies. So what other pop culture are you getting into these days, Craig?
Well, me myself, since the last time we recorded, I went on a bit of a Jerry Falwell palooza in terms of watching movies. I watched Hulu has a documentary that's pretty like sensational and not very good unless you just want to learn more about these idiots, but it's called God Forbid, and it's basically chronicling the kind of hilarious downfall of Jerry Falwell Jr.
And his cabana boy, or his wife's cabana boy,
his wife's cabana / pool boy, and that's kind of where the movie is kind of so the pool boy is like the main figure of the movie. The man himself is actually in it. Yeah.
Okay.
He's being interviewed, and I feel sorry for the kid. He's like in his 30s at this point, but he was like 20 when they approached him. Basically, what happened was, like, Jerry Falwell and his wife were at a resort in Miami. They saw this pool boy. They were like, "Hey, come back to the room." And like, we all know the deal. Like, Jerry Falwell Jr. enjoys watching, the wife enjoys performing, whatever. But the movie definitely has like a strong element of kink shame in it, where like the first half of it is like, get a load of this wildness, when really it's just like three consenting adults like.
Right, the shame is that Jerry Falwell Jr. is in charge of a hateful church that was deeply hypocritical. The kink shame should be exclusively attached to his inability to allow other people to enjoy their lives, as he clearly has no problem, embracing his own.
Yeah, and the movie does touch on that, but it also does spend a lot of time being very like sensational about the idea of like just.
Y'all know what a cuck is,
right? Yeah. Like, it's just kind of like, okay, yeah, like it's cool. Like, and the guy himself, the pool boy himself, is like, he is especially kink shaming himself, and like he has this weird guilt, which like I don't necessarily like whatever he feels about the situation. Like, I think that's fine. Like his guilt kind of involves like the idea that like I was in part of this wild sex world, and like he doesn't mention a whole lot. No, He does. It's just a very like I don't know. It felt like it was also like being very kink shamey and sensational.
It's tabloid TV.
It definitely
Yeah.
tabloid TV, but it did get me to watch a movie that I had never seen before because I was like, oh, I need to watch that, and I watched The People versus Larry Flynn,
Hell yeah.
which is an awesome movie. I love that.
Great movie.
Yeah,
One of my
Woody
favorite
Harrelson.
directors of all time.
Yeah,
Milos Forman.
Yeah. And Woody Harrelson's performance in that is incredible, especially like the post stroke scenes where like Woody Harrelson's he's just great in that, and Courtney Love's really
Courtney
good too.
Love
Yeah,
is really good in it.
Yeah.
Courtney Love, I mean, again, another Milos Forman film, Man on the Moon. Courtney Love in both of those movies, you go, oh, there was a window here that closed.
Yeah.
And it is depressing.
Yeah, I think she becomes a bit of a punchline a lot of times, which I think is not wholly without merit, but I also think it's kind of representative of how we did like women in the 90s media, and how like you had to fit this certain box or else you were going to be labeled as difficult or whatever. Which like no comment on Courtney Love actually being kind of wild and any nutty thing she actually did.
There are a lot of complexities there. I mean,
Yeah.
Frances Bean is, very publicly stated that she was not a good mother, which was visible, but it's another thing to have confirmed by the adult child of that person.
Right.
And but obviously the narrative that she murdered Kurt Cobain, who was known to experience suicidality, was known to wrestle with drug addiction and substance use concerns, like, is some misogynistic bullshit.
Yeah. Did you ever see that? I never watched it, but they made a terrible documentary. I just called it terrible. I've never seen it, but it's the one that basically gives credence to the idea that she did kill Kurt Cobain. I think it's Soaked in Bleach.
Yeah, I recall what you're talking about, but no,
Yeah.
I never watched it. I think it is like undignified, essentially, and like disrespectful to his memory to try and lay the full burden of it on her shoulders, regardless of her faults.
Yeah.
But
yeah, that one is called Soaked in Bleach. It came out at the same time as an actual good Kurt Cobain documentary, which was Montage of Heck.
Yeah, I do recall that.
That one's great. It has a really cool like animation in it too. But the other thing that I've been watching, sorry, I've got several here, but I did a rewatch of Eyes Wide Shut.
Hell yeah.
My wife had never seen it, and so and didn't really know what it was.
Ooh.
Like, she knew there was like weird sex stuff in it. But didn't really know anything else. So she kind of watched it blind. So that was really fun watching it with her blind. And
that's it. That is exciting to kind of peel through the mythos. I think people our age, or approximately our age, who were kids when the movie came out, that there is a mythos built up around it, and then you actually watch the movie and you're like, wow, what is this like dense but delicate, unique artifact about the existential crisis in the context of marriage? It is so outside of the universe of what I personally expected.
Reputation, like, suggests that it's this, like, you know what? Because I hadn't seen it in a while. Like, do you remember how many scenes are at the orgy or the sex party or whatever you want to call it?
It's just it's like one.
Yeah.
I mean, it
sequence.
exists. Yes, it's one sequence. There's multiple scenes, but
I guess that's my own like bias of feeling like it is like this dirty movie or whatever, because I remember so much of the movie taking place there. And it's literally like 10 minutes of the movie.
I mean, that really speaks to Kubrick's power, right? That he's able to dominate the imagination with probably 7 to 10 minutes of a movie that's substantially longer than that.
Yeah, and so much of the movie is just him wandering around and encountering these. I had this theory that I'm stupid, so a million people probably had this theory, but I think that we're watching his end of the same dream that Nicole Kidman has. Like, there's something that I feel is almost intentional that every sequence in that movie feels so dreamlike in the way that you just meet weird people and they kind of monologue at you for a while and then you kind of are just
And you
somewhere
float
else.
on.
Like
Yeah.
every scene that Tom Cruise is in without Nicole Kidman just feels like a dream where like you know how in a dream where you just feel like it goes on forever where you're just listening to someone monologue at you and then
Yeah.
a lot of it doesn't. Anyways, so I'm
No,
a dumb
no,
guy, but so I thought that. I mean, somebody's
don't-
probably like, "Hey, yeah, a million people have had this theory, you idiot." But
I don't think you're an idiot at all. I mean, to me, what makes the movie so powerful, and I'd seen it before as a teenager, but I also watched it a couple weeks ago, and because of Blank Check,
oh right,
because
they're
they
doing
were
Kubrick.
doing
Yeah.
Kubrick, but to me, upon watching it this time, and maybe it's because I'm someone who has been married twice to Ben, and um it to me is very much about like the threat of exogenous eroticism.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in a very direct way of like the threat of cheating, but also in, like I said before, a much more existential way of just the idea that long-term monogamy means shutting yourself out to the outside world, that there is a sense of mystery and wonder that exists beyond the boundaries of your marriage that you will never touch.
Yeah.
And that is what blows my fucking mind about that movie, is that it's like something that has been depicted in a lot of like kitchen sink dramas, right? Of like men and women hate each other, something like, which I do love, both the Albee play and the Nichols movie, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. And that level of ire is not present here. That's obviously a different pathway through the marriage. But just that idea, oftentimes it's depicted as like two people involved in this like struggle. And very rarely is it like this abstract struggle with the unknown that you want to touch but are afraid you'll never be able to touch again. It's like, whew.
Yeah.
What a movie. What a picture.
It's great. It has a reputation as being like lesser Kubrick, or at least I feel like it did. Maybe I feel like maybe people are coming around now.
I think there's been a shift.
Yeah,
I think there's been a shift in more recent years.
Yeah.
But it's funny. Yeah, again, it has that salacious reputation when, A Clockwork Orange, I would say, is like decidedly more disturbing and
almost
salacious.
all of his movies are. I feel like yeah, I Hope Shut is not that salacious. Like it has the orgy scene, but other than that, it's just a marriage drama essentially.
And Nicole Kidman looking hot.
Yeah, and if in the premiere, go to if you want to see a little topless Sidney Pollack.
Yes.
he spends quite a bit of time at the beginning of the movie
to get
with no shirt on.
Some Sidney Pollack.
And I always forget he's in that movie, and I'm like, Sidney
right.
Pollack.
Yeah.
All his chest hair.
Preeminent
just,
director, killing a sex worker, maybe.
Yeah. Maybe.
Yeah.
What have you been watching?
So briefly on the watching front, I will just mention this. I watched M for the first time.
I love
M 1931.
Yeah.
By Franz Lang.
Fritz
Lang.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Fritz Lang is the director, starring Peter Lorre. Also, in watching that, that's when I learned that Peter Lorre is Austrian. Like he started speaking German with everyone else, and I was like, oh, that guy is not American, which I did not know.
I haven't seen it in a while, but I never really thought of that. But
I think some of I'd seen him in, some kind of classic American gangster.
Yeah, Maltese Falcon.
And I mean, I guess he has an accent, but I just kind of assumed it was the like white ethnic doing a thing, which Hollywood, silver screen Hollywood loved. But that movie, great. I love diving into older film and watching something and going, this feels like fresh. This feels new. This feels like, I mean, not to put, just to over exaggerate too much, but like revolutionary in terms of what it's doing visually. Those scenes at the end with the mob justice
chasing him through the alleys.
Yes, and where they all are collected kind of in the sewer there in a giant mass.
Yeah.
Just really, really beautiful. And then I've been reading Junji Ito's Gaio. Gaio.
Ooh, I don't know anything about that.
He is a Japanese manga artist. I, as a teenager, really loved alt comics. Like I was a really big fan of Daniel Clowes, like Charles Burns, like stuff in that vein, Arcrum, stuff like that. And then I didn't read it for a really long time. And then earlier in this year, I was like, let's dive back into that. I've never read any manga, but I've had people tell me, you like body horror, you should read Ito. Like, why have you not done that? And I do think there was probably some like internalized stuff that I need to process in terms of the shifted format with, the reading things right to left. It takes a little bit of time to get used to. But this is the third or fourth of his book I've read this year.
Nice. I'm a bit of a comic book boy, but I've always been intimidated by manga. Because
this
I
is
feel like,
literally the only manga I've ever his work specifically, but I do own several of them, including this if you'd like to read them. The classic I would say is like Uzumaki, which is Spiral. There's actually a movie based on it too that I watched in October for the first time this year. But body horror and also cosmic horror. There's very much Lovecraftian elements of like these otherworldly forces impinging themselves, on the lives of kind of everyday Japanese folks. And then finally, I want to mention I have been playing Pentiment.
Ooh, which is a video game.
It is.
And for our longtime listeners, we've only done 4 episodes, you might remember Hal saying that they don't play that many video games in our first episode, so this is a departure. Let's hear about Pentiment.
Yeah, it's a narrative game. So part of why I've liked it so much is, I think I maybe mentioned this in the first episode, but part of why I don't play video games very much is they weren't allowed in our household when I was a kid. And I just don't have the thumb dexterity to do so comfortably. Like, I don't have a good time because I struggle. It's a narrative game, which means that there's no combat and you're not doing any of that shit.
Yep.
You're just pressing decisions. I will say I'm horrible at it. There are all of these like micro objectives embedded in the game where decisions that you've made before, it literally pops up across the screen and will say, this will be remembered. And then you're like, why though? And then 20 minutes later, after the 4th time that's happened, it goes, oh, there was this like hidden objective to convince this person to do this. I have lost failed, I suppose, every single one of those except for one, and I'm pretty sure I'm in the last act of the game. So I look forward to playing it again in the future and not grasping the darkness.
Yep.
But it's a lot of fun, and the art in it is like an illuminated manuscript. It's like really beautiful.
That sounds cool.
Yeah.
I have a similar experience that my wife and I have. My wife's a little bit like you in the sense that she didn't really grow up with video games. She doesn't really have the thumb dexterity. Loves Animal Crossing, which I'm not that big of a fan of. So I'm always looking for things we'll enjoy together. And we found some narrative games that we like. And we recently played The Quarry, which is cool. You should check it out.
Are you in a mine?
If you say that again.
Are you in a mine? Like, is it? Or is it Quarry? Like
it's The Quarry. It's a montage to like slashers, and it's a summer camp, and you play as all the counselors trying to. I won't say what the threat is, but you're trying to survive the threat. And listen, when I say that maybe one of us, me and my wife played together, maybe one of us also takes after you in the sense that they weren't so good at the mini games. And
this isn't even a mini game. This is like. I think of a mini game as like a side quest almost, where it kind of pops out. You're like, oh, there's distinct rules at this part.
Right,
this
right.
is like embedded in the conversations that you're having. Surprise! There's like another objective.
Okay. Yeah, that's kind of how the Quarry is. Where like all of a sudden you'll have to do an action, and maybe one of us, of my wife and I, was not so quick on the draw with the action, and we may have killed most of the counselors before we got a great resolution to the game. So I'm gonna have to give The Quarry another shot, but you should check out The Quarry. It's fun, especially if you like kind of cheesy like
also David Arquette.
Oh yeah, it does have some like some famos in it.
And Skylar Gazondo.
Oh, I don't know who that is.
He is most recently in Licorice Pizza.
Oh, I never saw that one.
Oh wow.
I need to watch that. That's been on there.
He's a dude. If you saw his face, you would go, yes, that man.
That guy. Yeah. But yeah, David Arquette is one of them. I feel
Oh
like
my
there's
God, Justice Smith.
Yep.
Okay.
And I think that woman that I love that's in everything in like the 90s. I specifically remember her as the mom from Detroit Rock City, a movie that's probably terrible, but I loved as a kid. She's also in that.
And Lance Hendrickson, horror icon of the
Yes.
Alien series.
Yep. So yeah, the Corey is super cool.
Okay. I mean, I immediately searched it. I will be exploring that. I have never, ever played a narrative game, and this one was just really scratching an itch for me as someone who does enjoy, the a medieval gloss on things.
Yeah,
Right?
sure. So, what's happening in the world this week that's got you either celebrating or in despair?
So something that made me laugh was Elon Musk being booed on stage with Dave Chapelle.
Yeah, we love that.
In particular, Elon then going on Twitter and saying that it was 90% cheers and only 10% boos, you guys. So I just want to say fuck him, and it's wild. If I was that rich, first of all, I wouldn't be, because it's deeply like morally and ethically wrong.
Right. There's no way to become a billionaire without
and also
doing awful
to
things.
persist in being a
Right,
billionaire,
yeah.
to continue to hoard resources and capital. But
Also, your dad owned a diamond mine or an emerald mine in South Africa during apartheid. Stop
Right.
acting like
Evil.
you're Iron Man, you
Right.
douchebag.
Evil. But seeing that, I'm just like, if I were, or anyone with any level of sense had resources that were functionally untouchable, to humiliate yourself, to willingly humiliate yourself in that way is just beyond the pale. And
I also think it showed how off of the pulse Dave Chappelle's thumb is, because if you watch it, he's like, ladies and gentlemen, the richest man in the world. Like, he's almost anticipating a mic drop moment, and then it's booze. So, like, I mean, we already knew that Dave Chappelle is kind of no longer in touch with
out of touch.
Yeah.
But not even reading the room for his own audience is pretty wild.
Right. Yeah.
And then the other thing I wanted to mention is that it will have already happened, I think, by the time this comes out. But December 17th is International Day to End Violence Against Sex Workers. And I want to talk about this a ton right now. But I would encourage people to follow and connect with organizations that are doing work, in particular those that do work as it relates to sex work that is, one, led by sex workers, and two, are tied to the abolition movement. So see the threads between mass incarceration and the subjugation of sex workers. And the main org for that, I would say, is Survived and Punished. And then another I would recommend would be Sex Worker Outreach Project Behind Bars, or what is their it's often fashioned on social media as SWOP, like SWOP, Behind Bars. Yeah. How about you?
Yeah, unfortunately, I have two things, and they're both things that have me in despair. I mean, I laughed at them a little bit because Kristen Sinema is always going to be funny. But yeah, Kristen Sinema is essentially holding Arizona hostage to continue electing her.
The most embarrassing bisexual to ever live.
Yeah, Kristen Sinema basically withdrew from the Democratic Party, is now registered as an independent. She's still going to caucus with the Democrats, so it's not like really nothing's going to change necessarily with her vote. The issue is in elections, because obviously Kristen Sinema is not the person that she campaigned to be. So I imagine people are just waiting to vote her ass out. But now, as an independent, she is effectively going to split the Democratic vote and basically forcing Democrats to either coalesce behind her or knowingly split the vote and give the seat to Republicans. So it's a selfish move, and yeah.
She's also, I think, because she'll be up in 2024, trying to call the Democrats' bluff on, like, the funding of it all, right? Like, will they continue? I mean, there's vote splitting, but then there's also can she make the Democratic Party her bitch by supporting her monetarily in the face of her refusal to align with the party in any meaningful way.
Yeah. And yeah, she sucks. I don't care what anybody says. Her outfits also suck.
Yes. Fuck her.
It's like,
seriously, it offends me as a bisexual who is fashionable, by the way. You can't see me, viewer or listener or reader or whatever modality.
Whatever.
But I'm pretty fashionable in general.
I can confirm.
And I'm bisexual. And I have the good sense to reject Christian cinema.
The other thing that I want to talk about does not really have any funny components, but that is the rail workers strike that was effectively ended by Joe Biden, who campaigned as being someone who was pro-labor, and basically that is it's probably never true, but obviously is not true now. For those who might not know, rail workers have been in negotiations. Basically, they get paid terribly. Also, the big issue with the rail worker strike was almost no sick leave. A little background: basically, these rail companies a few years ago came up with this strategy that they call precision scheduled railroading, which was basically a strategy that was cutting costs by cutting jobs. Basically, any way they could save a penny. It also instituted this points-based attendance policy where rail workers were punished for missing days, unexpected days off. So calling in sick, there was this points-based attendance policy. So if you have a sick day and you don't make a shift, then essentially you're getting punished for that. So part of what they were bargaining for was, above all, getting paid more, but also getting paid sick leave, because rail workers essentially have no paid sick leave. And they've been bargaining for, I think, 3 years, and were basically threatening strikes before Joe Biden essentially mandated Congress to have a vote effectively ending the possibility of a rail worker strike because they didn't want to affect the economy. So yeah, Joe Biden is not a friend of the worker, not a friend of the union. The rail worker strike is effectively over at this point, and they've been forced to accept a contract negotiation that is far below what they wanted.
Yeah. Strong arm being an agency of the people.
Yeah, it's a bummer. It sucks. There's not a whole lot to add. I mean, our country has a history of, especially over the last 50 years, of not respecting unions or workers and things like that. And I guess the silver lining is that this will continue to be a great example of liberal politicians kind of paying lip service to unions and workers without ever actually supporting them.
That's a lot more optimistic than what my silver lining is, which is at least they didn't bring the Pinkertons in to shoot them.
Yeah, nobody died at least. So let's start moving into talking about our movie proper here, which we are going to discuss Sean Baker's The Florida Project. But before we do that, we started a new segment last week where we talked about our top threes. We're going to have a different top three every week. And this week, let's have a top three of Willem Dafoe performances. Willem Dafoe is kind of the heart of the Florida Project, and I want to hear what are some of your favorite Willem Dafoe performances. By the way, we kind of coordinated. We kind of knew each other's beforehand, but right before you got here, I changed some of mine because I love Willem Dafoe so much that I was not happy with my top three, so I had to rearrange it.
All right. Do we want to mention our honorable mentions first?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a Paul Schrader directed picture.
He spells it wrong.
I
shouldn't have given that away. My last name is similar, but I spell it the correct way.
The correct way. Paul Schrader directed a picture called Autofocus that's about the Hogan's Heroes.
What was that guy's name?
Downfall. I don't remember, but I have to tell you, when I watched this movie for the first time, I went, "Is this real?" Like, there's several things about it. I did not know that Hogan's Heroes, the television show, what the content of it was.
It was like, hey, what if the Nazis were fun?
Right. Was
It's kind of the
slapstick
premise of the
Nazi
show. Yeah.
comedy. Also that, the lead actor essentially experienced a downfall because he was filming pornography with his buddy. But
Bob
that's
Crane,
what the
by the
movie.
way.
Yes,
Yeah,
okay.
was the guy's
It was
name,
the actor's name. That's played by was that Greg Kinnear,
Greg
I think.
Kinnear, yeah.
But his buddy is played by Willem Dafoe. And it is just a really good example of Willem Dafoe playing unhinged, but there is a veneer, right? Because they're like, anytime you have essentially like a scam or a con going, there has to be some level of convincing, right? Some charm, some charisma. And I just think it's a really good, it's not as wild as some of the picks on our list, but it's just a very solid performance from him. Yeah. What's one of your honorable mentions? And I'll bounce back to.
Well, I have two, and let's just go ahead and gloss over one of mine because I think it might come up later, which is Willem Dafoe as Jesus Herbert Christ in The Last Temptation of Christ by Martin Scorsese, which I think might come up in a minute. Yep. So we'll skip over that one. And my other honorable mention is a very divisive movie, Lars von Trier's Antichrist. He's great in it. It's a wild movie. He's great.
It's totally bonkers that Lars von Trier said that Willem Dafoe's dick was too big to be depicted.
I was thinking maybe you didn't even know about this, and I was going to spring it on you.
But the movie, or the dick that is in this movie that is on screen is huge, which is like leaves the question of what kind of python is Willem Dafoe carrying around.
For those who might be
does he have a license?
Apparently, Willem Dafoe's hog is a little is apparently so large that it's off-putting on screen. So there is a scene where Willem Dafoe's character in Antichrist has to be nude, and they had to use a penis body double so as not to shock audiences at the size of Willem Dafoe's genitals, which
I feel like on some level I'm willing to believe that, and then on some level I'm like, no, Lars von Trier is ultimately like a carnival barker, because there's also in that part of the movie where this large dick is present, unstimulated sex. So I feel like maybe that's it. Like maybe Willem Dafoe, as a 57-year-old or however old he was when this movie came out, as a A-list movie star, is like, maybe I shouldn't be having real sex on camera.
Yeah.
For this like Scandinavian freak.
But I choose to believe the mythos around it because I like that.
I think it's possible that he both has a huge bang and slang and hog, and also he did not think it was prudent to be slanging that hog.
Yeah, I do think Willem Dafoe is a bit of a gentleman. I feel like.
I think so.
Yeah.
He always in interviews has a real like tender artist's heart.
Yes, I love Willem Dafoe. We haven't talked about this before, but I love him. I agree. I want him to be my dad. I don't know. He just is great. He seems like just I would tell him all my secrets and hope that he would give me his shoulder to cry on because he seems awesome and he's a good actor.
Yeah, I feel like he would be a great accompaniment in like a European cafe. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like where you're just kind of sitting and chatting.
And he might all of a sudden
taking 3 hours to eat a meal.
Yeah, and then you'd learn that like he's lived there for 7 years and he can show you all the cool places around. And he seems like a cool dude.
Yeah.
Do you have any more honorable mentions?
Spider-Man. I think
he's good in that.
I think he's fucking great in those movies. He again just has like a real like devilish, impish quality to some of his performances, and he's kind of like genuinely frightening as the Green Goblin. Also, while investigating, kind of thinking, trying to craft my list, right, I learned that there's a movie called Pasolini where he plays Pier Paolo Pasolini.
Oh, I've never seen this.
Me
nor heard of it.
either, and I didn't know that it existed. And it is a major priority for me in the
Yeah,
next week. Like,
that-
as soon as I get off of work and begin the embark upon winter break, this is a major priority for me and my couch
Hell
this
yeah.
week.
Maybe I'll watch that as well, and we can discuss on the next
Oh my
pod.
god. We should do a Pasolini episode at
Oh,
some
I
point.
figured it was coming at some
Oh my
point.
god.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, no.
Gazes off into
I feel
the
like we gotta
distance.
at least get 10 episodes before we like hit people with Salo.
Oh, I'm not even talking about Solo. Like, that, of course, like, it's timely to dissect. I also think it might be worthwhile. The trailer for Infinity Pool, Brandon
Brandon Cronenberg. Yeah.
For listener, if you're not familiar, man who directed Possessor and is the son of much lauded, much beloved on this here pod,
Yep.
David Cronenberg.
Mhm.
His new film Infinity Pool, which comes out at the end of January and stars Alexander Skarsgård and Mia Goth, has moments in the trailer that give me big ass Solo vibes, like people with
Ooh.
leashes like on their necks, lined up in a bare room. Like, there's
Okay.
just so who knows? Maybe that comes out and there might be a reason to
Hell
make
yeah.
a comparison.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. But okay, you want to go first with your number 3?
Yes, and remember, I told you I changed up my top
Yes,
3
I see.
because I couldn't decide. So tell me if we need to wait because this might appear on yours. But my number 3 is Willem Dafoe as Sergeant Ellis in the film Platoon by Oliver Stone.
That is also my number 3.
Oh,
so
cool.
I love it.
Perfect
Hell
timing.
yeah.
Yeah. He's great in this. He's kind of like what I like about him is he's the dude that still has somewhat of a moral compass in Vietnam, and as at the same time recognized what a disaster and fruitless effort it is, but still has some sort of responsibility as a leader amongst this platoon to answer to. It's just a very it's just a very conflicted performance of a man who exists on two opposite ends of a like moral spectrum, and he's great in it. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And also, ultimately, that role is about the incompatibility of those
Yeah.
polar opposite perspectives, right?
'cause
And
the Tom what's that guy's name? I almost said Bergeron. That's not right. Berenger.
yeah,
Tom Berenger.
I think.
The dude with the scarred face and Platoon. I haven't seen it in a minute. But yeah, he's kind of the other end of it. The like super aggro, very violent, very like burn it all to the ground, kill them all, let God sort them out type.
When he makes, to allude to a film later on the list, makes the kind of ultimate sacrifice, right? Like that. I mean, when we say it's incompatible, it's like he literally cannot continue to live in the face, of those of that contradiction. I also think it's you mentioned when you were talking about how much you enjoy him and why you would want to hang out with him, that there is this kind of paternal vibe, and not paternal in the politically paternalistic, but like warm fatherly vibes. And I do think that his role in Platoon has some of that sense of care and like the ability to lead and direct that has a paternal element to it.
For sure. And I think we'll get more into that when we talk about the Florida Project. But so our number 3s were the same. You want to do your number 2?
Sure. My number 2 is The Last Temptation of Christ.
Hell yeah.
As mentioned.
It was my number 3. That was one of the ones that got bumped to an honorable mention because I couldn't decide. I love him that much. But yeah.
Yeah, I just I think that part of why for certain part of why the movie was so controversial was because of the humanistic depiction.
Right.
And the humanist depiction, which shows that Christ was not wholly certain of his own status and role, and that one is the willingness to portray that. I think reveals a boldness that I find laudable in an actor, and also just makes it very relatable. Like, I don't think, even though the evangelical model towards Christ is that of having an individual relationship, that he can be known to you, I think that this is a different form of he can be known to you, that model can't even begin to imagine exists, of like imagining yourself in the role of the other, in this case in the role of Christ. So yeah, what about you? What are your thoughts on the movie
I
and
love
him in it?
Last Temptation of Christ. I also love just the story of Last Temptation of Christ. The idea that the Vatican condemned it, when it couldn't be more like pro Jesus. Like,
Yeah,
the part that the Vatican
it's deeply
hated was that,
empathetic.
yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. And I mean, Scorsese is like an
Catholic.
OG Catholic, so like, yeah. But I love it.
Italian Catholic.
I do want to point out one thing I absolutely love about the movie is that Scorsese did not have them use accents. They just had their own accents. And the best one is by far is Harvey Keitel as, who is he? Paul? I don't, one of the apostles. But he's just got to like, hey Jesus, hey, get a lot of this over here, huh? He's just like Harvey Keitel, like New York guy throughout the whole movie, which I deeply love that choice to not have them use accents and just talk in their regular voice.
Well, and again, I think it speaks back to that idea of like, imagine you were a person who the entire moral universe of the world has come crashing down upon your shoulders regardless of your will.
Yeah.
Right? That there's making them relatable through their accents, not creating this like artificial, hermetically sealed world, makes that feel a little bit more real. Like, the anxiety and uncertainty is understandable.
Sorry, y'all. Forgot to turn my phone on silent there. Yeah.
He plays Judas.
Harvey Keitel plays Judas?
Yes.
Damn. I gotta rewatch that movie. Regardless, his accent's
Added
great.
to the list.
Love it. Haven't seen it in a minute. Yeah, it's a great choice. That was also, I believe, at one point on my top 3, and then I bumped it to one of my honorable mentions.
Yeah. What is your number 2?
My number 2 is more of a cameo, but it is incredibly memorable. I'm a big David Lynch guy. I love him. One of my pets is named after a character in the very movie we're going to talk about, which is Willem Dafoe's performance as Bobby Peru in Wild at Heart.
Wild.
Yeah, it's probably, maybe he's probably in the movie for less than 10 minutes.
Yes.
Oh, there is the scene afterwards where they have like the botched robbery or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I would say he is a minor character. I don't know.
For sure a minor character. But his scene, specifically the very menacing scene where he bursts in on Laura Dern's character, whose name is Lula. That's my dog's name.
Mm-hmm.
And that scene is incredible. He is so menacing, so creepy. It's where he's got the like pantyhose over like half his face, and his teeth are all disgusting. And it's just
he's got fake teeth in.
Yeah.
I mean, the character is intended to be those are his real teeth.
Right,
but...
yeah. But it's just Willem Dafoe like fully in command of a character that is just going to wreck whatever is going on. And like, he is just a powerhouse in those like few scenes that he's in. Yeah, he's a nightmare in that movie.
He is. He definitely brings the menace. I have to say, this is a movie that I did not see until this year.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Did you like it?
I did not have super fond feelings for it.
Okay.
And I think that in part it may be a function of age of first viewing.
Okay.
That it's hard for me to fall into the whirlwind of their narrative.
Romance?
Yes,
Yeah.
and their romance. At age 31, it just like was not stirring anything in me in that way. And I like romantic dramas. It's not like I'm opposed to that, but it just it fell a little flat for me because it felt immature, which is its point. That's what it is.
Sure, yeah.
But it just didn't resonate with me and kind of stick to me. But the thing that I always love about David Lynch films is obviously the dreamlike, that surreal menace, that sense that there is something creeping around the corner that you know is coming to get you, that is ill-defined, and yet like omnipresent, and then just has these really disturbed manifestations that pop up. And I agree that Willem Dafoe's performance of that role definitely brings the thunder in that way.
He's a nightmare. Yeah, and also weirdly, the movie that I find most similar to Wild at Heart of David Lynch's is A Straight Story. Have you seen Straight Story?
I have not.
Oh God, it's a Disney movie that's rated G by David Lynch. It's so good. It's
Wait, is this about the farmer?
Yes.
Okay.
Richard Farnsworth plays this elderly man who learns that his brother is having this medical emergency, his estranged brother. And Richard Farnsworth's character is elderly, has had his driver's license revoked because he can't see, he just can't drive. So he drives his tractor from his home across the country to see his ailing brother. And a lot of the movie is just this odyssey of this man and the weird people he encounters, which is kind of a little bit like what Wild at Heart is, in that these two people go on this weird odyssey and just are encountering these strange people. But yeah, you should see Straight Story. I love it so much. And it is so David Lynch, but like so far from what,
with a lot of the dressings.
Yeah, like it is like David Lynch obviously has kind of an obsession with like suburbia and like Americana, and this has that in there where it's just Richard Farnsworth driving through these small towns and encountering people and like David Lynch style weirdos and stuff. But it's this very like wholesome story. And can I spoil just a little bit?
Yeah.
Harry Dean Stanton is the brother and has a fantastic.
Whoa.
He's only
Love
in it
it.
like sorry, spoilers, y'all. He does meet the brother
For a movie
eventually.
that's what, 30 years old?
Yeah, he does meet the brother. It's the final scene, and it's Harry Dean Stanton, and Harry Dean Stanton and Richard Farnsworth have this like great scene together at the end.
Okay.
Yeah,
it's worth.
awesome.
I do like a Harry Dean Stanton.
Hell yeah. So what's your number one Willem Dafoe performance?
My number one Willem Dafoe performance is The Lighthouse.
Love it.
I love this movie.
Yeah.
I think that this almost like trickster deity figure that he plays is both so obviously him. Like there's something about him suffused through it, but also unrecognizable from not just like other roles that he's played, but also from like roles that men are occupying, you know, in the 21st century and film. And you know, the kind of the final shots that he's in that are based on the painting. He possesses a power just through his physicality, which is in contrast to earlier in the film when he is being funny. I mean, essentially unintentionally, like his character is not within the universe.
Is comedy,
he's not being funny.
I do feel like the movie is a straight comedy. Yeah.
It's kind of like a divine comedy in some kind of way, but yeah, I just think his performance in that movie, it spans the spectrum of beats and is really powerful both emotionally and in his physical performance.
Yeah, it's great.
What about yours?
Oh, my number one is Shadow of the Vampire. Have you ever seen Shadow of the Vampire?
I don't know, to be honest.
Oh, it's so good. Okay, so you've seen Nosferatu.
Yes, in many iterations.
Yeah, so Shadow of the Vampire is about the making of Nosferatu. The original Nosferatu, the 1920s.
FW.
And yeah, the F.W. Murnau one. And Willem Dafoe plays actor Max Schreck, the actor who played Nosferatu.
Right.
Except in Shadow of the Vampire, Max Schreck is actually a vampire. So it's in this movie, he is playing the actor Max Schreck on the set filming Nosferatu, except that Max Schreck, the actor, is a real vampire filming a fake vampire movie.
Okay. Also, John Malkovich is in this.
John
apparently.
Malkovich is in
I
it.
am very in. Also, these pictures are kind of horrifying. Like he looks
He looks
legitimately
bizarre
frightening.
and weird. Yes, it is at once a like a kind of like behind the scenes Hollywood type movie and also a horror movie. And Willem Dafoe is bizarre and strange, and I love this movie. It's so weird. Shadow the Vampire. Everybody should go see it. It's so good. I do feel like it's one of the ones that doesn't get talked about a lot as far as Willem Dafoe. But he's so good in it and so weird and creepy.
Yeah, those photos, and again, I love John Malkovich. That's convinced me. Also, I do love a movie about movies. You know,
Yeah,
a movie about
I
movies.
also do. Yeah.
If you love the pictures, it's hard to go wrong.
Right? Yeah, and John Malkovich plays F.W. Murnau, trying to like wrangle Max Schreck in. Yeah. So it's kind of a two-hander with the two of them. Actually, probably I haven't seen it in a minute, but I probably like John Malkovich is more of the lead. It's kind of more about
he's billed first.
Yeah. Yeah, he's more of the lead. And Willem Dafoe's definitely supporting, but you know, it's kind of his movie. He steals the show in every scene and is just he's great in it. And it's also got a lot of other great people in it. Udo Kier, Carrie Elwes, Eddie Izzard is in it.
Ooh.
It's got a really good cast. But yeah, check out Shadow the Vampire. It's great.
I will.
Okay, so that brings us to the reason we are gathered here today, which is Sean Baker's 2017?
Yes.
Did I get 2017 film, The Florida Project? First, a little background on Sean Baker. He did a movie a few years earlier called Tangerine. Did you see Tangerine?
I have, yes.
Tangerine is awesome. I would recommend it. And I do remember being very skeptical of Tangerine at the beginning. Do you remember what the like gimmick was with Tangerine?
No, I don't.
Sean Baker shot it all on an iPhone.
Oh, on an iPhone. Yes,
yeah. So I was very skeptical at the beginning of Tangerine, but Tangerine is great.
I still think it's his best movie.
I love Tangerine. I love The Florida Project. I don't know. I don't know if I could.
Have you
pick.
seen Red Rocket?
I have not. My wife and I almost watched it last night, and we did not. But I really want to see it.
It is not an easy watch. Like I would say, it is a harder watch than The Florida Project.
Ooh, and then Florida Project's not necessarily an easy watch either.
Yeah, and honestly, me having seen that movie first, I think affected my perspective of The Florida Project because I listener. Oh, okay, cool. That's my email. Sorry. Listener, I don't think I said this in the air, but I had not seen The Florida Project prior to watching it for this here pod. Not for any particular reason. I just never saw it at the time, and I tend to prefer bigger productions. So it just kind of missed me. But Red Rocket really maps out some interiority for Simon Rex, who plays the main character in it. Even while he's doing really fucked up shit, it's not excusing it, but you see his emotions and kind of like his experience of it. Then seeing The Florida Project, watching it a couple of days ago for the first time, I found it really lacking in that regard. Okay. Like, I think that I really did not like that we did not see any emotionality or interiority from Haley until the very end of the movie.
Yeah.
Like, I had a hard time because it does feel like the movie is essentially being seen through Willem Dafoe's character, Bobby's
a lot of times
eyes.
Yeah, for sure. So ooh, I like that. I feel like maybe this will be the first movie we've done so far where we kind of disagree a little bit as far as I feel like 1 through 3 have been
Fight! No.
mutual love, whereas I do love The Florida Project. I was trying to find it here, but
what do you rate it as? Because I want to make it clear, like I don't dislike this
sure,
movie.
yeah. It's just
I'm a lot milder.
It's just
on
not ringing
it.
the bell as hard as some of
Yes,
the other ones. Yeah,
exactly.
What do I rate it as?
Yeah, like
I mean, I
let's
am
say
on
like
Letterboxd. Y'all
okay.
can find me, Keg Freighter. Yeah, I think I have a 5 out of 5 on
Wow,
Letterboxd.
okay.
I really love the Florida Project. Yeah, but let me say this before we get into our difference of opinion on it or anything else on it. I do want to talk a little bit about that title itself and what that means. You're aware of the reference, the Florida Project?
Not, I guess, with any like specificity.
So the Florida Project was the name of a 40-ish minute, we can call it a propaganda film that Walt Disney put out, basically kind of pitching the Florida properties of Disney World and Epcot to like potential investors and the audience as a whole. Basically, Disney was for years trying to keep it secret that they were developing a park in Florida, and for years just referred to it internally as the Florida Project. And yes, Disney, the company, looms very large over this movie. Hal and I are both from Florida, so we might have a little bit more info on kind of what the area around Disney is like than somebody that might not be from Florida. But so essentially, we can kind of start at the beginning here. So Disney kind of bought this property in Florida because they wanted a new property on the East Coast. They wanted a new park. They had Disneyland, and Walt Disney was not really. He wanted more land, essentially. He wanted more area he could control. Because Disneyland itself in Los Angeles or Anaheim is not that large. So he wanted a larger space. So he went to Florida. They went to a lot of places, actually. But they settled on Florida mainly because of
the weather.
Also the proximity to like I-4, I-95, the Turnpike, like all these big intersecting areas. And they landed on this space. And eventually they bought that land. It was 27,000 acres that he bought. And they developed it into this park. And for years, as they were developing it, was referred to as the Florida Project. And Walt Disney died in like 1966. May he roast in hell. And his brother is the one who like finished creating Disney World. So basically, Disney World pops up in this area. And they convinced the state of Florida to basically give them governmental powers over 27,000 acres that they own. Like Disney World controls kind of their own utilities, their own water system, basically everything.
They did.
Yeah.
They did.
They did, right, because DeSantis got in a little yeah.
Interesting bargaining chip later down the road.
Right,
for the state of Florida once they felt like they needed to leverage control.
Right, because they went woke, and DeSantis has already told us that Florida is where woke goes to die. That's an actual DeSantis quote. Yes, so that has been in the news lately that DeSantis has essentially revoked their ability to kind of govern their own property. But yeah, so a byproduct of this is essentially all of the areas around Disney are these areas of extreme poverty. Kind of the Disney property has pushed other people to the margins. There was a pretty good documentary in the early 2010s by Alexandra Pelosi, actually, called The Motel Kids of Orange County, which is basically kind of looking into this phenomenon about these families, specifically the children, living out of motels in Orange County around Disney properties. But yeah, so the Florida Project, the name is kind of a reference to Disney itself, which kind of contributed to the scenario that we see play out in the movie.
And I think Disney looms larger and is like the backdrop for everything that happens in this movie, even though it does not show up. We'll talk about whether it actually is showing up or not.
Right.
At the very end of the movie, but from the Magic Castle to the tourists, believing that they like essentially the husband misbooking their appointment or their reservations, to the discussions in the main lobby about, not bothering the tourists and staying out of their way,
Mhm.
as if they're like a privileged class of people in
Right.
this place that is many of these people's home. That Disney is cast a shadow on the whole movie.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. The whole movie. Yeah. It looms large. So the Florida Project is essentially about this mother and daughter. The mother's name is Hallie, played by the actress Bria Veneti. I'm not sure quite how to pronounce that. And her daughter is Mooney, played by the young actress Brooklyn Prince. This seemed to be for Sean Baker's first two films, Tangerine and this. Both of them are non-actors. They're people that he found, which is kind of the same with Tangerine, which was largely a cast of non-actors.
He does that in all of his films. I mean, Simon Rex is an
Right.
actor, and there are other people who are actors in Red Rocket, but there are many people in it who are not.
Yeah, yeah, which
as
I
well.
love. Like I love that decision. I find both of these actresses in this movie are incredible. Especially Mooney, the Brooklyn Prince, which I think is a testament to Sean Baker a lot of times because I don't know. I imagine how difficult it must be to get a good performance out of a little child. And Brooklyn Prince just knocks it out of the park in this. She's great.
Especially late in the film when she goes
Mhm.
to her friend Jancy's
Yeah.
room because she's being taken away by
Yeah.
DCF. Mooney is being taken away by DCF and says that she has to say goodbye to her. She's run away and she's concerned she's never going to see her friend again. That scene is bonkers bananas that a
Yeah.
child executed it.
There's
I'm like,
several-
what was happening? Like, did you pinch the child?
Right.
Like, the child is
How
sobbing.
do you get a kid to do that? Yeah, how do you
Right.
get a kid to understand that, like the nuance and the complexities of that? But yeah, she crushes it. And the woman who plays Hallie, again, I'm so sorry that I don't have the pronunciation correct. I'll just call her Bria. She's also great. Like she's really good too, and she has really cool chest tattoos. She has a lot of tattoos, but specifically the ones up here on like the top of her chest, they were super bright and colorful. I don't remember what
The
they were.
flower. I think
They
she
were
had,
like flowers.
roses,
Yeah, that's really cool. So yeah, the movie is about this mother and daughter who are living in this kind of seedy motel because they don't really have any other options. We don't really get a whole lot of backstory on how they got there. We're just introduced to this mother and daughter who are doing what they need to survive and living out of this motel, which is managed by a man named Bobby, played by Willem Dafoe. Yeah, and a lot of what I like about this movie is a lot of the room that Sean Baker gives to let it breathe. Like I think Sean Baker is someone who's intensely interested in like preserving the dignity of like marginalized people. So we get a lot of just seeing these people interacting with each other, being humans with each other, and which is something I love.
Yeah, I think it gives us space to see their relationships and the contours of them. I think the other thing that it shows us, which is maybe kind of points in a different direction, is the lack of structure and the aimlessness of not having your life be rooted to institutions.
Yeah.
Right? Like Hallie doesn't have a job to go to. It's summer, but I get the feeling that her daughter was probably not spending a whole lot of time in school
Right, yeah,
anyway. So there's just like this free flow of time
Mhm.
because it's not demarcated or punctuated by this contact with institutions.
Yeah, and I think a major thing that's going to be developed is how these institutions are kind of leveraged and weaponized against the poor, the people in poverty. Which I think we've already alluded to the DCF scenes, but yeah, the institutions that are I guess meant to protect are not rightfully not represented very well in this.
Right. And I think one of the scenes that stuck out most to me in that regard, outside of the DCF parts, is when we see that Bobby makes Hallie and Mooney take all of their things and put them in an entirely different room than the one that they consistently stay in and pay for, and leave to go pay somewhere else for another night, which leads to a whole confrontation, all of that, because ultimately that the law as it relates to residency should exist to protect residents, right? It exists to say, I have eviction protections. I have the right to process, like due process as it relates to evictions, that I have a claim to this space, that you can't just turn my utilities off or throw me out or make it uninhabitable without there being some process. And this has been designed, this approach that Bobby and the motel are taking is designed to deny them any access to those rights and the consistency that come attached to them.
Yeah. And I think Bobby plays kind of an avatar of maybe the viewer, almost as somebody who's maybe a little bit better off than the residents of the motel, but also sympathetic to their issues, but also at the same time he's there to enforce kind of the rules of the landlord, the owner of the hotel, and is kind of conflicted about that throughout. There's a scene that we'll get to it, but there's a scene at the end where Willem Dafoe is just, I mean, I honestly I could have put Willem Dafoe in this movie as my number one because he is so good, but I didn't want to double up on it. But he's so good in this movie. Yeah, and speaking of those institutions, an early on scene we see is Haley being denied TANF. Do we shorten it like that? The TANF, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. TANF. Yeah. And it is because basically she has not worked the required hours to qualify. And kind of an early on scene that we see of how these institutions are kind of holding the people who need them most hostage by these archaic rules. Because essentially the reason that she doesn't qualify for TANF is that she has worked at a strip club before, but because she won't offer sex at the strip club, her hours are cut back. And at that point, they tell her that she has not worked enough hours to qualify, which is this kind of bizarre catch-22 that we put tons of people living in poverty in all the time.
Yeah, I would say it's a significant marker of the transition of our social welfare state to what's called workfare instead of welfare, right? The idea that you have to work in order to qualify. You're no longer viewed as a person,
you're viewed as
your labor capacity, right? Exactly. Like you're reduced to your labor capacity. And, TANF used to be called Aid to Families with Dependent Children, or AFDC. And this was transitioned to TANF in 1996 with Welfare Reform Act under Bill Clinton, and
we love him.
Right. And under that transition, there was a shift to, like I said, work requirements being attached to qualifications for accessing welfare programs. As well as putting lifetime limits, so how long you can be on the program for, within any given state, but then also for your lifetime as a whole. So this is a very, this movie is about a particular experience in a particular time in a particular place in America.
Yeah, I mean. Well said. I was going to add on to that, and then I said, no need. One thing I do want to take note of on a lighter note is these kids in this movie are goddamn adorable, and they say a lot of really cute things, and I did take a note of some of the cuter things. First off, Mooney has this kind of cadre of, like, buddies, friends that live in the motel. There is Scooty, who is one of her friends. There's Jancy and Dickie. I love Dickie because Dickie's dad is possibly the most Orlando man that's ever existed.
Yes. Oh my God.
Tank tops and star tattoos and backwards ball caps and just a straight up Orlando dude.
Yeah.
But yeah, one of the cute things they say at the beginning is Scooty calls. This just tickled me so much. Scooty says the only thing I don't like about oranges is the lid. and they have a whole conversation about whether or not the peel on an orange is a lid or not, which, like, these kids are so cute in this movie. It's so good. And another cute one, which kind of leads us into kind of what Mooney and her friends do, is kind of convincing. It's kind of like focusing on the tourists as a way to earn a quick buck. And the way Mooney does that and her friends is they convince tourists to buy them ice cream at their favorite ice cream stand. But what Mooney says, which I love, is the doctor said we have asthma and we have to eat ice cream right away. Just so
right
good.
away.
Yeah, so good. I love it. But yeah, we do see Mooney and Haley kind of doing these different, like, kind of having these different, like, schemes to kind of make $1 here and there off the tourists. They buy these perfumes and try to resell them at not their motel. First off, was that a motel or was that like a country club that they're selling them at? I couldn't quite tell.
The one that she eventually gets ejected out of, and then we see her like have to leave behind some of her stock, that looked to me to be like more a resort in the area. Some of the ones that are shown initially, that's like straight up like a Courtyard Marriott. I feel like I've stayed at that. Like you know, just certainly there are multiple sites shown in this film where I'm like, I've been there, right? Like the Wizard gift shop. Is like
I was watching that with my wife, and I told her, like, I've seen that. I've 100% seen that before. I can't bring up the exact memory, but we've driven by that 100%. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And there was a motel shown that I was like, I have been in that. When I was in college, and it was like, where can we find a place that's $30 a night?
Mm-hmm.
No one's gonna bust you if you smoke inside.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and so we get a little bit of time of kind of introduced to the characters, spending some time with them, and kind of the first like big scene of kind of some friction we see is this more affluent couple that think they've booked a hotel at a Disney resort and realize they booked at this motel filled with a lot of people who are living in poverty and kind of have made this their residency. And we have this kind of ugly moment where the woman refers to the hotel as a gypsy motel, and they have this kind of a meltdown in the lobby of the hotel. I don't know. What do you think about that scene?
Yeah, and I think it's great way for Sean Baker to demonstrate just how abrupt or maybe how distinct the line is between insiders and outsiders at this space, and that even though it could be relatively easy if one is not sympathetic to the precarious experiences of working poor people and also poor people who aren't employed, that it's easy enough to point to like their actions and their decisions that are putting them in a situation, and that casts a really stark contrast to say like, no, they're being otherized by anyone who like anyone outside of their world that they would have contact with, right? Like these people do not want to have contact, view them as a threat. And I think it's really important to have that contrast to show that like this is not like a self-selection, right? This is not a decision to remain on this kind of like unique and in some ways like sad, right? Or in many ways sad island. Like it is a marginalization that is like intentional by people who are external. Yeah,
and we see that idea get even more explicit a few scenes later where there is some sort of nonprofit or charity that's giving out food to the people. It's a church. That's right. It is a church. And a man asks him, "Does this have to be here?" Meaning visible in the front of the motel. Basically, the idea that
it's the owner.
It is the owner. That's right. Yeah. Willem Dafoe is the manager of the hotel, but there is an owner who we see later enforce a lot of the kind of like simple laws that kind of show how poor people can't really live with any sort of dignity. Like the owner is
criminalization of poverty, like the bikes. Like they can't have their bikes. And it's like obviously people are attaching the bikes to the gate because it's less likely to be stolen
Easy way to lock
if they
it
can
up,
see
right?
it immediately in front of their motel room doors,
Yeah.
as opposed to locking them all up in one place on the opposite side of the building where no one can see it. It's like, obviously that's right for it getting stolen.
Right.
But
Yeah,
the dude doesn't care about that because he doesn't care about the dignity of the people who he makes his money off the back of. He just cares about whether or not he's going to be fined.
yeah. And I think Sean Baker does a really good job of kind of like pointing out all those little ways that just
Yeah.
like these things get weaponized against poor people, essentially. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think that's one of the strengths of the movie is seeding in a wide variety of different ways that we see are attached to the law, that are attached to landlords, right? That are attached to agents of power, but without it, again, being like, hey, everybody, did you know
Right.
that landlords are horrible?
Right. Yeah. He avoids the obvious and does a lot of really subtle stuff that I love. Yeah. So that's kind of out because I just eat my own tongue. So then we get kind of an idea of maybe how Haley is making some money in that we see her reselling a perfume that she has bought to these tourists. But then our first kind of hint that we're going to get into that maybe Haley is involved in some sex work is she mentions one of her friends asks her if she had spoken to that guy from OBT, if he ever called you. Did you pick up on that, being a Florida person?
Mm-mm.
So I again, the movie doesn't explain it, but I believe OBT is a reference to Orange Blossom Trail, a large roadway through Orlando that is usually that you can find sex workers on Orange Blossom Trail. So we get kind of an early hint that maybe Haley has is doing some sex work here. And we'll get into it later, but I also love the way that Sean Baker refuses to cast any judgment on sex workers. I think in the way the scenes later are shot, we'll get to that, but
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and I think, well, again, one of the things I like about this movie is that I think he does a really good job of building up this kind of like escalating sense of inevitability and dramatic irony that Hallie is being boxed in and has very few options left to negotiate her way out of her quandary. And I think part of that is the way that it is seeded in. Like it doesn't go like suddenly one day there are dudes in their hotel room and she's talking very explicitly about being on Backpage, right?
Sure.
It's like, oh, they're hey, Mooney, let's take pictures in our bathing suits and let's take pictures together and let's you're making such a cute face, let me take a picture of you. And then it's like, oh, let me now take a picture of me. And it's like, yes, okay. And it's like, and each scene that builds towards the where she ends up, right, and where her family ends up, it cascades slowly and kind of accumulates over the course of the movie. It's not just like sprung upon or made super explicit. Her decision is naturalistic because we see that she has no other options in front of her.
Yeah, definitely. Another thing that I want to mention in as far as, again, singing the praises of Willem Dafoe in this movie, but some of the silent interactions that he has with Mooney and Brooklyn Prince, where they're not even speaking, they're just, the both of them are so good in these scenes. And the one I'm really thinking of at the beginning is the one where Brooklyn Prince is eating the ice cream cone in the lobby of the hotel, and Willem Dafoe's just staring at her, waiting for her to like make a mess or drop, and then she finally does, and he's like, "All right, out." But there's like 15 seconds of them just looking back and forth at each other, and those like just silent moments are great.
Well, in the moment that she does drip, he says, "I told you, that's it."
Yep.
But there's so much more dramatic tension even in this very simple moment, by Sean Baker not showing us the beginning of the interaction or the previous interactions that obviously laid the groundwork for this, right? Just showing her eating it and then him reacting.
Yeah. Another thing, I've seen this movie a couple times, but something I picked up now on this one is the idea of more affluent people treating poor people almost like zoo animals that they gawk at. And what really stood out to me were the helicopter rides. The like touristy, they live really near Disney, so I'm assuming these helicopter rides are kind of going over the Disney property. The first time we see it, we see Mooney flicking off the helicopters. But what really stood out to me is basically every moment of like really strong, like moments where Mooney and Haley are in distress. You can hear the helicopters in the background, or it'll cut to the helicopters taking off. And even specifically in the later scenes when DCF comes in, I almost feel like the helicopter noises get louder. Almost like it is these tourists, these more affluent people, these more bougie people kind of gawking at them throughout the movie. I don't know if there's anything to that, but it's just something that I picked up more on this viewing.
That makes sense. I think there definitely is something to the fact that poverty impacted people don't have access to privacy.
Yeah.
Right? And that takes a lot of forms, like state intrusion, like DCF coming into your life. It has to do with your landlord having more leverage over you, but it also has to do with things like rich people live in houses with 5 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms, and everyone can have their own space and no one's ever in their shit, whereas everyone here is multiple people in a room at all time, multiple people in beds. We see at one point in time when Hallie and Moon go to Jancy's grandmother where she's staying. I forget. I don't know what that character's name is, but and they're staying there because they can't find a space anywhere else during the residency swap situation. And there's 5 people in a single hotel room staying there, with one bed. Yeah. Let's talk about the pervert.
Yeah, let's talk about the pervert in the Florida Project. There is a scene where I think is maybe kind of a scene that is meant to kind of reinforce the idea of this constant threat to the people living in this motel, where this old dude kind of comes and starts being creepy around the kids. Which, there's not a whole lot to talk about, except in this scene is maybe Willem Dafoe's funniest scene in the whole thing. I'm just gonna say the way that Willem Dafoe has the line reading, where the man, basically this pervert comes and Willem Dafoe realizes this guy's being creepy and is like, "Hey, what are you doing here?" And the guy's like, "Oh, I was just stopping to get a soda." And Willem Dafoe's like, "Okay, well, why don't you come over here where the soda machines are, away from the children?" And there's a great line reading where the guy picks out his soda and Willem Dafoe goes, "What a choice!" Which I really like. And then, what a choice. And then slaps it out of his hand.
I love his escalation in that scene. Yeah. Because when he walks up, it's obvious why he is approaching and intervening in this man talking to the children.
We know. Yeah.
Right? It's clear that that's what's happening. But Bobby retains his composure all through, but he's getting a little more insistent as he continues to redirect the guy back towards the soda machines. And then after the guy has the soda, he starts away. He just is throwing shit, hitting him. So
good.
Yeah,
what a choice.
Like he wanted to lull him into.
So good. I love that. If there's any levity in that moment, it's the pedophile scene. Weirdly, is the scene of just straight up comedy where Willem Dafoe is just being hilarious.
Yeah, and there is some physical comedy in it. He's very big gestures when he pulls the guy's wallet. Yeah.
And then another thing is the Mooney and her friends become kind of obsessed with what they call I watch movies with the subtitles on sometimes because it helps me concentrate. And
I watch it 100% of the time.
Okay. Yeah. They call them the abandons, not the abandons, but the abandons.
The condos.
The condos of just abandoned condos that are just kind of rotting, and Mooney and her friends accidentally set them on fire, which is a great moment. And it also is one of the first moments that brings in the idea of the threat of DCF, because it's one of her friends. I think it's Scooty's mom.
Scooty's mom, Ashley. I will say there is a reference to DCF before then, because I can't remember what the exact context is, like what the action is that leads to it. But Mooney is doing something, and Hallie says, "Don't do that. I can't get arrested again on DCF." Yep. So like there is like a seed planted very early on, but the idea that like it's not theoretical, that it's impending, definitely is popping up here.
Yeah, which it does lead to another hilarious moment, which is Haley not realizing that Mooney and her friends set the fire and making her pose for a picture in front of it, which is just straight up that meme of the little girl like.
I know. I had the exact same thought.
Yeah. So good. I love that.
And I think it also shows this incident is important for obviously driving the plot and creating a motive for, I think it's pretty clear, Ashley calling DCF.
Yep.
But also demonstrates that not all poor people are the same.
You're right.
Or have the same set of ethics, or respond the same to challenges and marginalization. I think Hallie obviously has developed a like kind of a devil may care, like just kind of riding the waves of whatever impulse or whatever like opportunity for distraction arises, but that is very much not how Ashley is responding to their circumstances, and their circumstances are shared. They're the same, almost
identical.
So I think that again, Sean Baker is doing something interesting there with like, it's not as if he's written a narrative that is, or did he write this? I actually don't even know.
Great question.
But it's not as if the narrative, whoever wrote it, is exclusively about like a paternalistic idea of this is how all people respond to class oppression.
Yeah. He did write it, by the way. He had an additional writing credit, but so we go a little bit longer, and then we start to get some more explicit references that Haley is in fact doing sex work to be able to pay for their for them to survive, essentially. First off, we get the more subtle reference when Willem Dafoe asks her where she got that month's rent, and then we do see her asking, her daughter and her are going to take bikini pictures, and she does ask her to take one of her, and we get the idea that maybe these are going to be used for something else. And then we get those repeated scenes of Mooney in the tub, which come to represent, when we see Mooney in the tub, we get an idea of what might be going on in the other room, until finally there is a man that walks into the bathroom and sees Mooney in there and kind of says, "What, you have a kid?" And that's kind of the first explicit time where we see that Hallie is doing sex work to kind of keep their survival, basically. And again, I think just really great work by Sean Baker, kind of preserving the dignity of sex workers. It should go without saying, sex work is work. It should be unionized, all those things, protect sex workers, all that. I get the sense that Sean Baker probably believes something parallel to that based on how he treats Haley in those scenes.
Yeah, but I also think that there's an important like realism, and I mean realism in terms of depicting reality, but I also mean realism in from like a political perspective, which means like not being an idealist, right? Like not having this like idealized idea of where sex work means work, therefore the dignity is inherent to it, and instead acknowledging that like the precarity of sex work is a unique status, like is a unique experience, and that like she is vulnerable because of her lack of access to resources, and is turned to this again because she has no other option. So it's like I agree that it does definitely seem that he's empathetic to sex workers, but I think it's also like sometimes, especially like in a hashtag Instagram world, like sex workers work is like most people who perform sex work, particularly, well, anywhere in the world, but in the United States, are not having a good time and they're not doing it because that's what they want to be doing. But that she is making the dignity comes in where she is making the choice that is available to her in light of the constraints that she's facing.
Yeah, doing what she can.
Yeah, with what she has. Yeah.
And it's essentially those scenes of sex work that get DCF involved in the film because her friend Ashley essentially calls DCF on her, tells her basically she knows what she's doing. We do see Willem Dafoe is also kind of suspicious, asking her why she has so many people coming in and out of her room. But yeah, we get towards the end of the film where these scenes with DCF, which are really heartbreaking, and one thing I love that Sean Baker does, if you go back and watch, there is almost no shot where you see the faces of the DCF workers. Every scene is focused either on Hallie or Mooney, and
sometimes Bobby
sometimes Bobby kind of lurking in the background, kind of
yeah.
But almost every single shot, the DCF employees' faces are obscured, and we are just strictly focusing on how these DCF visits and this DCF authority kind of affects Mooney and Haley.
Right, and they're the faceless arm of the state. Like, who they are doesn't really matter.
Right, exactly.
Right? Like, it could be anyone occupying that position. It's more about the parental, and child bond and how it's being severed by the state while they pretend to protect it.
Yeah. And we do kind of see the DCF scenes escalate. We see them a couple times. I will say before we get to the end, I would watch an entire 2 hours of Willem Dafoe shooing sandhill cranes off of the property. Love that scene. That seems to be in there for almost no reason, but I love it so much. These two big-ass sandhill cranes are kind of walking around the hotel, and there's just like a 45-second scene of Willem Dafoe just shooing these cranes off the property.
And making a punny joke.
What does he say? I forget.
It's foul, but I don't remember.
Yeah. He says, it's a foul pun. Yeah. I love that. And then we get kind of the big like centerpiece of the movie, which is the scene where DCF has, I guess, concluded their investigation and has decided that Mooney needs to be separated from Haley and sent to a temporary family. And these scenes are devastating. And again, I know we keep saying it, but Willem Dafoe in these scenes is incredible. Specifically the scene where he knows what's happening. He hears it. He has to remove himself because he's going to have a breakdown, and he's smoking a cigarette, and there's these washing machines that have been messed up the whole time. And he tells this random person, he's like, I'm going to fix those by the end of the week. And he's just hanging on to any sort of like, I'm a good person, right? I don't know. Those scenes are so good.
I agree. It definitely comes off as trying to like, I'm doing my job here, right?
I'm doing by these tenants, right?
Right. That's that is my goal. But also, I love that woman's response in that scene where she goes, okay. Like there's 7 question marks right at the end of the sentence. Like, she cannot give a fuck because promises and wishes mean nothing when your life is on the edge of precarity.
Yeah.
Like, just do it, bro. I feel like is the implication. Like, I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah. And DCF shows up and attempts to take Mooney away. And that is the moment where Mooney kind of breaks free from DCF and goes and finds her friend. Was that Jancy?
Jancy, yeah.
Jancy, yeah. And you alluded to it earlier, but they have this moment where they just start running, and eventually they run through the gates of Disney World itself. Kind of our first very explicit reference to Disney, even though this movie is very much about Disney. But I think what you were alluding to is something that was going around when this movie first came out. Is that a real moment? Is that happening? Is that a manifestation? Is that wish fulfillment? That last scene?
Yeah, I think that's just I interpret it as just Mooney dreaming a little dream.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty obvious. Like there were multiple cops present
Right.
at the point of the visit by
Yeah.
DCF, right, and the intervention. So I mean, there's no way the little girl is running. Much less, obviously, she doesn't have a ticket. Like, but I think the reason why it is a lovely ending is because everything about this movie has been about the ways in which poor people's lives are circumscribed by that which they don't have, that which they don't have access to, and the people that control the things that they need and that they want. And it's an opportunity. It's an oh
Sorry.
no! Now Ben Shapiro's playing in the background.
Sorry, I was prepping our conservative reaction, and Ben Shapiro accidentally started talking. My apologies.
But in the face of all of that, what does it mean to give a child an opportunity to just dream unrestrained? And that's, to me, is about like, you know, sloughing off the shackles of everything we'd seen over the last, 90 minutes or however. I don't know how long. It felt short. It was probably longer than that.
I think it was about 90 minutes. Yeah.
Tight 90.
So the Florida Project. I do love this movie. I know you said that maybe it's not one that it essentially grabbed you as much. It is a little bit more distant. There's not a lot to hang on to as far as the story goes.
Yeah, and I'm fine with there not being something being heavily plotted. Like I said, the biggest thing for me was just I liked the movie on the whole, but I felt like Hallie's emotional world was not tapped into in any way until the very end. And
when it kind of comes crumbling down.
Yeah, and I'm not necessarily proposing some great alternative. Like the emphasis on the children is great. We talked all throughout about how there are these scenes that really demonstrate quite smoothly the ways in which poverty can act like a boa constrictor, and that's not from some abstract figure, right? But it's because of people in power and the dynamics of power. But I think the ending would have been more of a gut punch if I felt like there was any emotional complexity present in her at any point in time throughout the rest of the movie.
That makes sense. Yeah, definitely. So yes, we mentioned it here. It is time for our conservative reaction. This one is going to come from Mr. Ben Shapiro himself. Hal, what do you think Ben Shapiro felt about this movie? Do you think he liked this movie?
I assume he uses the phrase glorifying poverty.
Okay.
Here.
What if I were to tell you that Ben Shapiro thinks this is a great movie?
Whoa, really?
He does think this is a great movie.
Because people are being punished, because poor people are being punished at the end. Is that
probably? But
there's
also a lot more stupid reasons that he thinks this is a great movie. So we're going to do it slightly different. This is not a written review. This is a video that Ben Shapiro uploaded called Popular Hollywood Movies That Are Accidentally Conservative. First off, he talks about, in this video, which is quite hilarious, the first movie he mentions is A Quiet Place, which he says is accidentally conservative because it shows that even when shit is bad, you should still have babies. This is literally his reasoning in this video. I don't understand why that's conservative. But now we're going to get to his thoughts on the Florida Project. So I'm going to play a few clips here, and then we'll pause and talk, because I think we'll have some things to say about it.
So the Florida Project is not as openly conservative as some of these other films. Now, again, none of the people who made these other films would acknowledge that these films are conservative. They just are. Again, a film with an Academy Award nomination, a Golden Globe nomination, and reviews like this one from Helen O'Hara. Quote, vibrant and brimming with vitality, this is empathic toward its subjects, but fiercely critical of the system that victimizes them. And that's actually not what the movie is about. Director Sean Baker was also behind the transgender film Tangerine, which followed a sex worker on the hunt for his/hers cheating boyfriend, who's also her pimp. So obviously this is not a conservative person.
So we automatically, Ben Shapiro has got to bash trans people in this. So we, just in the preface to his review on the Florida Project, misgendering fictional trans people in a movie. That's just the appetizer here.
Well, also, it's like you can tell that his misgendering is put upon because he does correctly gender her in the
Yes.
second part of the sentence. Like, he's like, I have to forcibly misgender her because I don't even remember to do that just so I can make sure that I'm selling this to my audience.
There is an interview between him and Joe Rogan where they're talking about, I'm sorry, I forget the woman's name. She's in Orange is the New Black.
Laverne Cox?
Laverne Cox, yes. And he says, Laverne Cox this, Laverne Cox that, and anyways, her, and he pauses and goes, or him. So clearly he's misgendering on purpose. Like, this has happened time and time again where he's kind of, he's an asshole. I don't know why I even paused to talk about this. He's an asshole. He's intentionally misgendering these people and pretending like he's the one who's reasonable. But anyways, are you ready for this guy to really break down what this movie's all about?
Certainly not, but here we go.
The Florida Project follows a woman named Haley who lives with her 6-year-old daughter Mooney in a motel catered to the Walt Disney World tourists outside Orlando, Florida. Haley survives largely on welfare. She has pretty much no respect for other people, especially people who cross her. She has an attitude she's passed on to Mooney.
I failed as a mother, Mooney. You've disgraced me.
Harley?
Yeah, Mom, you're a disgrace.
Mooney is mischievous. She influences her friends into tricking strangers into giving her money. She talks back to the adults. She curses. These are all things learned from her mom. And then Willem Dafoe plays the sort of landlord at the motel who ends up trying to act as sort of a quasi-father figure and protect Mooney.
So we get Ben Shapiro kind of maybe accurately, partly summing up parts of the movie. I don't know. What did you think about that section? Was there anything that stood out as particularly stupid before we get to the supreme stupidity?
I mean, again, I think he's just putting forth a conservative idea, right? Like the culture of poverty thesis that poor people have children. They pass along their poor behaviors that caused poverty to those poor children. And then those poor children grow up to be poor fucking adults who then produce poor children. As if this is occurring entirely in a vacuum and there is no contextualization, no other people in this universe, no authority figures, no dynamics of power. It just is simply what's happening here is because Haley cursed and has no respect for anybody. And so Mooney has no respect for anybody.
Yeah. Essentially, what we've learned here, despite what Hal and I have said throughout the rest of this podcast, is that essentially people are poor because they make bad decisions.
The movie is certainly not meant to be a conservative rip on the need for fathers in the home and the need for traditional values and social fabric. But unfortunately for him, that's kind of what the movie is. It may be trying to be a critique of capitalism. It misses. It may be trying to be a critique of how we treat the impoverished in our society. It misses. What the film really is about in the end is how individual bad choices have ramifications for children. And that when you have children, you have to start making better decisions, because when you take all of the social institutions and fabric away from children, their life is essentially over. They're living in a dream world in which they cannot escape the nightmare. Right? This is the movie's basically about the fallout of having kids without fathers in the home. It's about the fallout from not acting well, even if you do have responsibilities to your own child. That when you don't have traditional family values, things fall apart incredibly quickly. The film was well regarded by the critics. Willem Dafoe actually got a nomination for Best Actor at the Golden Globes and the Academy Awards. And the film is good. The film also happens to be a complete referendum on bad behavior by parents who don't think beyond the next 5 seconds.
So you see, really, this movie is just about poor people. You got to start acting right.
I just love people, you watch that movie, watch that whole ass movie, and then say, how do these people not think beyond the next 5 seconds? It's like, well, bruh, their survival is not guaranteed for the next 5 fucking seconds.
Right, yeah.
Like, it's just, what a dumb
He's
fuck.
so stupid. I just love how gloriously he misses the point of this whole movie. And I honestly, I don't want to give him too much credit because I can't tell if this is sincere or he's purposely misrepresenting what this movie is about. But I think it is safe to say he is wrong almost entirely. The idea that this movie is about about why it's bad to not have fathers present is insane. First off, we see several characters who do have fathers present and are in the same situation. I mean, there is we mentioned that character of Dickie, who has the very Orlando dad. His father is present and finds himself in the same situation. Again, Ben Shapiro's a moron, and yeah. Would you like to add anything to Ben Shapiro's fantastic take on this movie?
I mean, again, I would just say this is something that a narrative that conservatives have been peddling for decades, like the better part of a century almost at this point, honestly. This idea that the culture of poverty, that there are no external factors that can produce these circumstances, that, people don't need livable wages. People don't need health care. They don't need access to welfare infusions that don't have workfare restrictions attached to it. They don't need food stamps, EBT, or otherwise some kind of food access program. They just need dads and to be raised right.
Yeah.
And it's fucking insulting to our intelligence. I guess I would say that it's insulting to our intelligence, but he's assuming that we don't have any. So,
right. And assuming his own audience doesn't.
Yeah, because we're not his audience.
If you watch Ben Shapiro enough, though, you will understand he has no respect for his audience. He is assuming they are the dumbest people on the planet, which, I mean, that might be one of the things that he's right about. They have to be pretty stupid. But yeah, the other reason that maybe we brought Ben Shapiro into this is because on our next episode, we're going to do something slightly different. We have been covering movies that either myself or Hal or both of us love. Our next episode, we're going to take a dip into the conservative movie realm. For those unaware, Ben Shapiro himself, Mr. Daily Wire, has created a movie production company and has created to date 3 narrative features. And we are going to start by watching the first one, which is called Run, Hide, Fight, a movie that is about a school shooting. So great taste. The Daily Wire is already showing that they have impeccable sense of decency by creating a hero movie from a school shooting. But are you excited to watch Run, Hide, Fight? I am stoked.
I am concerned about what me searching how to watch it on Just Watch.
Oh, I'm gonna send you something.
Okay,
because it is only available on Daily Wire Plus.
Okay, I was gonna say because I was gonna start listing, right? Like I'm concerned about what searching that on Just Watch will do to my searches.
Yeah.
I was what if I pay for it, that I'm putting money in the hands of Shapiro's pocket, and I feel like my bank account might revolt and start imploding upon itself.
Don't worry, I'm going to pay for it in completely legal ways, and I will send you something to watch it.
I quotation mark love that.
Great. So yeah, thanks everybody for listening. Oh, we keep forgetting to do this at the beginning. We should probably do it at the beginning, but yeah, do the like, the subscribe, all the things that you're supposed to do that I feel like is such an asshole when I say do them because I feel like a tool and a douchebag, but it definitely does help. I don't really understand how algorithms work, but if you could like, subscribe, comment, all that stuff, all the things that everybody tells you. Hal, any closing remarks here?
I'm praying for you and me in next week's episode.
Oh, you don't have to pray for me. I'm going to love it. I'm going to absolutely love it.
That's why I'm praying for you.
All right, everyone.
I'm just kidding. I don't pray. Just to be clear, listeners, I do not pray.
Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you on the next one.
Bye.